So Namita, you worked your way up even through the family business. You had a chance to observe different people in specific roles, different leadership traits. What, according to you, are the qualities, the finer qualities that come together to really make a great leader? What do you feel that people should imbibe? And some of the inherited qualities that are often referred to, let's say like ambition, for example, are these qualities that you can actually work on, or are you kind of born with them?
Great. Abha, I've been very fortunate that, I've met a lot of inspiring leaders globally as well as within India. And they all seem to have these two or three traits that stand out. And ambition, another word for that is drive, right, which I call fire in your belly. So I think that's the number one thing. That's what helps you just quickly jump out of bed every morning and get excited to go to work, right? So the drive, the fire in your belly is number one. Second, no substitute to hard work. I have seen leaders really go that extra mile and never shy away from hard work, right? And, the other important thing which I believe in, and I think that's really helped me succeed, is always hire people smarter than you.
Ah, nice.
I've always seen two kinds of leaders. They're leaders who get very uncomfortable with smarter people because they want an army of yes men and yes women. And then they're leaders who want people to challenge them. And they want, people who come up with ideas, great ideas. And I think that's the key. So I think these three traits, and of course, the fourth and most important is humility. Because when you're humble, that's when you keep learning and you keep growing. Now, all these traits, if you really take a step back, I don't think anyone's born with this. I think it's very easy with the right, parenting, with the right exposure in terms of school, or what you do in terms of reading, meeting the right people to really develop these over a period of time. So I'll give you my example. When I was very young, my father would invite some very, big business leaders home for dinner. And to his credit, he would always make me and my brother sit at the dinner table. I didn't understand a word of business or what they were speaking about, but just the way they were talking, that's what put that fire in my belly and made me say, oh, I want to be that someday, right? And that was something that I imbibed thanks to him inviting me at the dinner table for those important conversations. Long answer to your question. In summary is that yes, you can very well develop this. You don't have to be born with it.
You can develop it, and the importance also of having perhaps a role model or a mentor or someone who can help to groom you as well in this process.
Very important, very important.
How important is it today also for a leader to instill a sense of purpose in their team, to create a meaningful narrative, be more inclusive in dialogue than perhaps was the case earlier. Earlier, it was probably more that a CEO or a leader could dictate the terms, set the groundwork, and everyone just had to do it. But today, it seems to be a lot more important to have the team actually involved to get that productivity as a leader.
No, that's a very, very important question. And Abha, I'm super lucky because I work in an industry where there is a lot of purpose, right? Because healthcare has a lot of purpose. So I'll give you an example that's close to my heart, which is anemia. So in India, 50% of women are anemic. Not many know this statistic, and it's a shocking statistic, but 50% of women in India are anemic. So when we came out with our product, which was technology driven, the first in the market, Ferrous Ascorbate, it led to a 67% higher HB rise, hemoglobin rise. And just knowing that statistic, and then knowing that you have a product that's addressing such an important statistic and you're making a difference, really drove our team. And today, Emcure in India is a #1 company in iron. So most pregnant women will be taking Emcure's iron. Right. It's a total 300 crore brand, just the tablets alone, and the injectable and the syrup, and we've had various extensions. But to your point, the reason we've been able to build a brand of this size is because people were driven by that purpose. We did a lot of therapy shaping in terms of doing a lot of camps with doctors where we would test incoming patients because the biggest problem in India is people don't know that they have anemia. So our reps would just sit with these kits with the doctors, and 200 patients a day would get this free testing to figure out how many of them were anemic. So we did a lot of therapy building, a lot of market shaping, a lot of community engagement. And this purpose of changing the statistic of anemia in India drives us even today. And then, that's true for many other segments we're in. We're in oncology. We sell oncology drugs for pediatric. That's huge, right? To really look at that and think through that. We're big in pain management. We're big in infertility, which is very traumatic. So I think there are various therapy areas, stroke, which is becoming more common in India. So when you give people a purpose, they definitely get more driven, more enthusiastic. And I can tell you from a management perspective, it leads to lower attrition as well. So when you want to keep your people engaged, productive, and have a lower attrition, a purpose and selling that dream to them is extremely important.
No, that makes sense. And I also know, of course, talking about women, that you have a huge percentage of women in your workforce, but I'll come back to that in a moment. How do you draw the line as a leader between, let's say, sharing credit, also encouraging your team to go out there, come up with ideas, make decisions, but also, creating that clear boundary that the final decision is yours?
This is a very important and pertinent question, especially for family-run businesses.
Okay.
Because what happens is, I'll tell you, when I moved from the US to join my father's company, the first thing I noticed, especially because I'd worked in the US for 6 years, where everybody's arguing and there's a lot of aggression in meetings. When I came to India, I just saw there was zero dissent, right? And that wasn't because people weren't right and didn't have things to say, but when there's a leader or a visionary like my father, there's so much respect and there's so much awe and admiration that there's a little bit of what in management terms you call herd mentality.
Right.
That you just go with groupthink, you go with what the leader says, and then you don't speak up as much. And so for me, it's very important to encourage people to speak up in meetings, to be very comfortable with dissent, to just have confrontation, to give very different views and have a lot of discussion around that. So that is one thing I truly encourage in my meetings, to help make the best and the right decision for the organization. And I think in terms of me being the final decision maker, I've honestly not struggled with that, because I think when you join the company, everyone's looking at you as, what's she all about? But then when you prove yourself by giving some great ideas, great initiatives, great decisions, and you earn that respect from your people, once you've earned that respect, everyone knows who the final decision maker is.
I love it.
Yeah, so I think you have to earn it.
Earn it, exactly. And I think that's really important, because it is a journey and it is about getting there. Yeah. What about dealing with uncertain times, right? Given, for example, what we're seeing currently with COVID, it's not a situation that anyone could have prepared for. What were some of your learnings managing a crisis of this magnitude? Any decisions, big or small, that you can share with us in terms of what worked, what didn't work? Just the experience that you went through.
Absolutely. So I think COVID has taught us a lot, everybody, a lot of different things to different people. Specifically where I'm concerned, one of my biggest learnings, which I always knew, but it kind of really hits you, or hit me in the last 5 months, is you're always taught to think about the organization before self, right? And so in COVID, we had to take certain tough decisions where people are concerned, whether it was layoffs or, not giving a certain set of people increments. And that was extremely difficult, because as a person, you're all about team building, motivating. But then you have to think about the organization before you think about yourself. So I think that's a very important learning. And that's true in a pandemic or even otherwise. The second important learning was about empowering people. So we empowered a lot of our leaders, and what we were amazed by is the creative solutions they came up with to address COVID. So Abha, I was speaking to you the other day that from the very beginning of the lockdown, from March 24th itself, our factories, because they're essential medicines or essential commodities, were running at 80% capacity.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
getting these facilities to run at 80% is a big deal. And we really had to empower our plant managers, our HR heads, and they hadn't dealt with a situation like this before. So they had to be super creative. And once they were empowered, they blew us away with their creativity in terms of how they managed to get people to the factories in spite of the paranoia, how they put the protocol in place when there was none pre-existing and they had to come up with one. Right. So I think second learning is when you empower people, magic happens. Right. And that's just beautiful to see, right? And you have to be a secure person. Sure. To take a step back and really empower your people. And the third really cool learning, which I think is very interesting and important for the women in the audience here, is the whole work from home, right? We may not say it openly, but there were a lot of mental barriers in terms of work from home. Like FaceTime in India is very important. You have to be in the office, and you can't take off too much, you can't go early too much. There's a lot of these inherent biases. And I think people have just realized how productive they can be, even if there's work from home. They've become more open to it. And I think it's truly shattered these mental barriers, which a lot of women can take tremendous advantage of in these days. Because I think it's here to stay. It's not a COVID quality or a COVID situation. I think people, even post-COVID, will have a lot of WFH policies in place.
No, it's interesting you're saying that, because we are hearing this from more and more women leaders in particular, which I also think is important to mention, because I think that initially, women had sort of suggested they were drowning with the responsibilities of being at home. But as it's gone on, I think the families have found a way to distribute those responsibilities, and women are now finding opportunity. There are all kinds of new roles opening up that they can also consider. Thanks to work from home. So, I think we have to look at the long-term picture. So, managing people is always a challenge. I mean, you talked about empowering people, but also you handle about 3,000 people across different divisions. And that's a large amount in terms of keeping track of their performance or communicating constantly or understanding, their needs as you go along. How do you do it?
I think there's really two sets of managing. So because we have 3,000 people in the field, I can't be meeting them all the time. So for them, I'm very good about using frequent communication in the form of videos that I share on our Salesforce automation portal, or then town hall meetings. So I do webinars with them where we'll have a town hall and we'll discuss important top of the mind issues. So that's for the reps who are working with the doctors. In terms of the office staff, so brand managers, our medical department, our legal department, I ensure that I have the right number of face-to-face meetings to really get insights from them. Because women are blessed with an intuition, and when you sit with people, you catch a lot of these little insights, little nuances, and it really helps me meeting people. And I think of my job as asking the right questions. So every meeting I have to go and make sure I'm asking the right questions. Right. I am a very big believer in invest disproportionately in learning and development. So we have a very large and a very strong training team that's in-house, as well as we engage a lot of experts from outside. But it's extremely important to invest in capability building, because that's when it's not dependent on Namita. You have smart people at N-1, N-2, N-3 who are then capable of replicating that. And again, strong review mechanisms, Abha. You cannot speak enough about having a very structured dashboard and a very strong review mechanism top down. So we're a company that's extremely strong in data analytics, believes a lot in automation. And that's where we've invested heavily, and make sure that there's these dashboards that's really going to give you the right metrics to manage.
Got it. So Namita, I love that you're giving us an insight into the processes and the workings of such a large company as well. I also found it interesting because you yourself have taken it upon you to learn the ropes. right? And I want to bring that in because just coming back to what you said also about earning respect since you're part of a family business, but you actually did that. You took the initiative to go out there and do all the on ground work. And just I just want you to talk about that a little bit more, because I think it's important to realize what a difference it makes, to also know exactly what then you're going to ask your employees for later. It gives you that added insight.
Right. So I think that let me answer this in two parts, right? The first part is, as a second generation of a family business, it's a big blessing, but it is a big burden as well, because everyone looks at you as just taking over your father, and those are some big shoes to fill. So I think as being a second or third generation in family business, a couple of things you really need to do to earn your respect is, number one, I invested a lot in education. So I got my chartered accountancy degree. I made sure I went to one of the best business schools. And then the second thing I invested in is work experience outside of my father's company. I think that's extremely important. So I worked in Guidant and Glaxo Wellcome for a total of 6 years. And when you worked in a company that's not your father's and then join your family business, it gives you a completely different sense of credibility. So, part one of earning your respect is more from a woman in a family business. Exactly. And then the part two is just as an average professional. If you're not the family in the family business and you're a professional who wants to rise up the ranks, how do you earn that respect? And I think that's just outcome based. Companies like ours, which have grown 10x in the 10 years that I've moved back from the US, it's completely based on results. If you demonstrate results, sky's the limit. Because at the end of the day, companies like ours want to continue growing 10x, and we'll always want to retain and reward the performers. So I think there's no better solution than performance to earn respect.
Absolutely. No, and I think, again, it's important to point out how much you have to do with that, because I know, over the last few years, we've spoken a few times, and I've seen the drive with which you've approached the business. You're now heading it, you're executive director, and you are you're making sure that you achieve those goals. So I think that's fantastic, and there's so much more that's coming up at Emcure as well.
Oh, and it wasn't easy, because I started off in finance, because being a chartered accountant, my father thought it's safe to put me in finance, not ruffle too many feathers. And then after I did finance and HR, I was itching to control a P&L. You always get that itch that I want to drive sales. There's that kida of, but I want to make the sales happen. And it took me 4 years to convince my father.
Gosh.
4 full years. So,
amazing.
I think persistence.
No, I
a lot of evidence-based persistence. But he's happy now. I'm managing the India business for the last 3 years, and he's extremely happy. So I'm glad it all worked out well.
I like that quote, evidence-based persistence. I like that. So when you're like you're talking about empowering people, and when you're also trying to cultivate the next gen, right? N-1, let's say, or even N-2, and building that pipeline, because I feel a lot of family businesses don't do that. They don't actually cultivate a strong pipeline, or even not just family businesses, even mega conglomerates that we've seen in India have never done that successfully. Do you have a system in place? What are the qualities that you look for? How do you encourage people to work towards that?
So, my father's been very good about having a lot of professionals on board, and what he's used very effectively are two things. One is he's given everyone very good stock options, and a lot of people have a stake in the company as well. So our biotech company, which we'll be talking about shortly, we managed to get one of the best scientists from Washington, DC, because we gave him a stake in the company, and that was the pull to get him to join us. So Dad's done an incredible job of giving a stake in the company and ESOPs in a very, very disproportionate, generous manner. The second thing I always joke is that everyone other than the family is a CEO in the company. So we have 20 subsidiaries, and you have all these CEOs, and I'm not the CEO. So I'm like, when am I going to become the CEO? So he's very good about really empowering people. And when he's hired people for those positions and given a stake in the company, he's always looked, and I would like to look at the same traits, is, people a lot of times when they're talking in interviews, they don't realize, but they subconsciously say, I did this, I did this, I did this. And we always look out for the word we. right? So nothing in this company works unless as a leader, you can be a coach and you can really give that sense of purpose to a large team and move them in a certain direction. I think the number one thing we look for is the ability to be a good team player and to lead a large team. So we've had a lot of leaders who we've had to let go because they were fantastic as individual contributors. But they were awful as a leader of a team. So that's the first thing we look at. The second thing we look at is their comfort with setbacks, failures, because a company like ours that's growing so quickly is going to have tremendous complexity. So we call it in our interview the copability factor, right? And for the copability factor, you have to be very comfortable with rapid change, with complexity. And for that, you have to have a comfort with setback, with failure. Just picking yourself up again and then going at it again, right? So that's the second thing we look at when we look at leaders. And third is we're extremely system driven, again, very strong in data analytics. So you have to have a leader, like even marketing, it's not just about wining and dining doctors or the color of your packaging or your tagline, for the story behind your brand. It's about data analytics of figuring out why Delhi is not doing as well as Calcutta and what can you do in Delhi and what's your productivity per person and really managing the data well. So I think these are the three traits that we look for in people we hire.
Okay. And I have met your dad. I think he's a phenomenal spirit, so we'll talk, maybe if we have time towards the end, we'll talk a little bit more about his story. But you mentioned the vaccine, and I know that that's a tremendous area of interest for everyone. So I'm going to let you share the developments there. I think it's really exciting. And you spoke about the technology and why it's so exciting, and it puts you bang at the forefront of the entire development and the race to the vaccine that's happening globally. So share that with us.
No, we're very excited, Abha, because for those of you who've been following the global vaccine candidates, Pfizer and Moderna are pretty much at the forefront, and their technology is the mRNA technology. So what the mRNA technology does is, while it's putting in the antibodies that all vaccines do, it's self-amplifying so that it has a longer duration. You have the immunity for a longer duration. It also has a lower dosage and by function of that, fewer side effects. And Pfizer just got a $1 billion order from the government of US because that's how much they're betting on Pfizer's mRNA technology. And Abha, I'm happy to say that we, Genova is the only mRNA platform in India. And not only that, but we're the only ones who've actually got funding from Department of Biotechnology. That's a big deal because they're putting their money behind us. And, I think on 25th July, we got a letter from the DBT, Department of Biotechnology head, Renu Swaroop, where she's actually made it public, so for them to take out a press release and to make it public that we are funding Genova, I think that's a very big deal. Having said that, we hope to start our phase 1 trials in October. And, typically there's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We hope to finish all of that by January. We're a very low-key company. Since you've met my family, you know that, we want to show results and then speak. That's just how we've always been. So we're very optimistic, cautiously optimistic, but we feel very excited and very happy that we're one of the few contenders in India in terms of making something meaningful for the country at large.
No, it's very exciting, and I'm amazed at how you managed to keep your cool through all that's going on, because it's speaking to you through this lockdown, and I'm just like, how is she managing all of these things? There's so much that's going on, from when it first hit to now getting to this stage where you're actually leading from the front. That's a lot. In terms of your personal goals as well, Namita, like, where do you see yourself, let's say 3 to 5 years, at the company as a leader? What are the things that you're trying to achieve? Like, even if you want to keep, let's say, business milestones out of it for a moment, but what is it overall that would be on your agenda?
So, I'm a workaholic, so I can't put the business part aside because that's 80% of my life.
I was being nice.
No, but like you said, it's I'm going to be honest and say it has been stressful in COVID.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to fake it and say I'm this completely in control person.
Yeah.
I think I've been a complete stress case, and it's not been easy. But when we have support system around us, and I got on a Zoom call with you because I just love interacting with women who lift others, and you're the best at it.
Oh,
So, that helps having a good
I'm gonna take that for our promo. Yeah.
No, it really helps. I'm a girl's girl, and having women around you who are really going to lift you is very important.
Yeah.
Now, coming to my goals, I think professionally, once we go public, I see myself as the CEO of a public company, which is really going to make a big impact in India. That's at Emcure. When I think of YEA, which we'll talk about in a bit, my education, venture for children, I see myself scaling that and making an impact on the future generation. Once we go public and have a lot more free cash, I'd also like to invest in certain things, like maybe have a venture fund for women-led startups. I mean, that's something that's always been very dear to me. I know we have a couple in India, but I'd really like to do that at a bigger scale. So I have a couple of other such diversification plans that I have in mind post going public. But right now, Abha, we hope to go public in a year and a half, and that's just consumed all of us. I mean, it's there's really no bandwidth left to think beyond that.
And that takes things to the next level as well, right? In terms of accountability, public scrutiny, being a public figure, always having to report to the market, to your shareholders.
But Abha, we've had two very strong global private equity investors for the last 13 years. So we had Blackstone, and now we have Bain. So we are pretty prepared to deal with it, because we've always invested in strong automation systems, and every quarter Bain and Blackstone will have the same set of questions that a typical investor will. So I think as a family, we are very ready for it, and I would even go on to say that we're very excited about making headlines once we go public.
Nice. I can see that. No, that's great, and I think there's so much for you as a family and as a company to share and contribute, like you said, and it's also creating so much value for everyone around you. Let's just to remind everyone, Emcure is about a 5,000 crore turnover company, so that you can just guess that the valuation will be multiples of that as well. Namita, that's interesting because you're on the ball when it comes to business. You've got YEA, so you clearly want to develop the next generation. You've also constantly working on empowering the women in your company. You hold regular events for them, get speakers. You try to, of course, facilitate things for them and make it easier for them to achieve their goals. So I feel like inclusion is a big part of your agenda as well. Would you agree?
I completely agree. I mean, that's such a beautiful word that sums it all up. I think that's very important. Inclusion, and the other I word is impact. Right? You want to make an impact in the areas that are close to your heart and that you feel strongly about as an individual. So definitely, that's the case.
I know, I love it, because a healthcare company, and then when you're also focusing on things like inclusion, you're just multiplying the kind of impact you're going to have on society as well. Just coming back to the vaccine for a moment, is it too early to ask things like, how you see it being priced or how people manage to get their hands on it?
That is too early. So in Emcure, we have a few minutes back, I showed you our factory on the lab. So we have the capacity as we speak to make 200 million vials, which is a pretty big deal, right? But our aspiration is 1 billion. So we are working with different OEMs and tying up with them to get to that 1 billion. And I think this country, as well as the other emerging markets, is going to need a lot more than 1 billion. So if many of us put our resources together and build the capacity, we're going to achieve that. So how soon would probably be, early next year, if all goes well. And pricing, I think, is just very difficult at this point to speak about.
When you say early next year, you mean you think one could hit the 1 billion production mark by early next year?
I hope so, because there are a lot of people who are investing simultaneously. Like we're ramping up, and we've already made the capex investment to change our machines from a septic, and I won't bore you with the technical stuff, but the injectable facility, we've already made the investments and the changes. So I think a lot of people, even while the trials are going on, are getting in ready state from a CapEx perspective to ensure that the manufacturing keeps up with the need of the country.
You mentioned that you're ready to go public. Is that how does one decide when it's the right time? I know you probably collectively took that decision, but how does one know? And this could be relevant even at a, for other decisions, before you get to this big one, but but it's not one that you can really go back on, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's irreversible. But I mean, to a large extent. But I think for us, we've been thinking about it for a very long time. But your valuation is always better when you're a certain size.
Right.
So when we hit 5,000 crores this year, and then next year, by the time we file a DRHP, we'll be at 6,000 crores. So when we hit a certain size is when you get the valuation. Okay. Secondly, we're one of the few companies, if you really study pharmaceuticals in India, there are companies that are only India focused, but we're pretty diversified in terms of product portfolio, even emerging markets that we're present in. So we have a very, very solid story. So it's only when you're a certain size, you have a solid story, that you feel, okay, now you need the growth capital to be able to make those acquisitions to grow faster. And also with the doctors and general public, when you have a brand name that the public can relate to, it sells more medicines because there's a trust factor with a publicly known name. Also, let's not discount the fact that Bain has been a fantastic investor and needs an exit as well. So that's the right thing to do.
Okay, that makes sense. And so in terms of during the last couple of months, I've seen you speak with a lot of experts across the board, whether it be the likes of Rajan Anandan, whether it be in the healthcare space and ministry officials, discussing the current situation, discussing how best to deal with it. What are some of the key takeaways? Anything that you'd like to share with us?
No, it's a very important question. So I was lucky because I was on the Pune task force, as well as Niti Aayog made a very small multi-industry task force called Digital Health. Okay. And we actually made a presentation to Amitabh Kant and then eventually to PM Modi a few weeks back.
Right.
What is coming out very clearly is that we're obviously not investing enough in healthcare. We're at just, I think, 1.9% of GDP, whereas other companies are 13, 14 times percent of GDP. Bottom line is we need technology to address the access and the affordability issues in India. Sure. So on March 25th, telemedicine got officially approved in this country. Now that's a very big deal, right? Because you could do a video call with a doctor and get an e-prescription and just upload your reports and have your history, patient history, everything on your mobile. And a Chennai patient could be speaking to a Delhi doctor, and you could go pick and choose your doctors online. So telemedicine is a very big move that came about in end March, early April in the right direction. Mm-hmm. The second thing is at home. So, people like Porsche and all have been doing it. At home services, that's going to take off as well. And most importantly, we are working with this alliance called Swasth Alliance, which is being led by Myntra and now CureFit founder Mukesh Bansal and a lot of other entrepreneurs. So for the first time, tech and healthcare entrepreneurs, over 200 have come together in India to come up with a Swasth platform that essentially is talking about building India's health stack. Mm-hmm. And for layman terms, what that means is having all our patient records in an electronic format, having a health ID. So just like you have an Aadhaar ID, you will, based on your Aadhaar ID, will have a health ID. Based on your health ID, you will have all your patient records in an electronic format. You'll have all the doctors' data repository. And then you'll have this data of the patients and doctors connected to all stakeholders. So whether it's hospitals, insurance companies, e-pharmacies, diagnostics, everything will be covered in this health stack. And that's a huge step up. So if we can actually make this happen, that's going to be tremendous for this country. And so, I've really enjoyed all three engagements. Pune Task Force really done a lot. Niti Aayog The task force has been phenomenal. And then working on this Swasth platform has also been tremendous. So very excited because I see committed leaders for the first time in India coming together for national good. And that's only got to have very, very positive and significant outcomes.
And that's so important as well, right? The concept of partnering, collaborating, that's really when, you can actually see so much come out of it.
Right.
Okay, I want to talk about the next generation of leaders, whether they're going to be women or whether, from what you're seeing, even in the Young Entrepreneurs Academy, so many of them have found success so early on with their ventures and are developing so fast. What are some of the intrinsic qualities you feel we'll see in the next generation?
I'm blown away by the next generation. So I have 750 alumni in YEA so far. And a lot of these kids I stay in touch with, I have regular conversations with, and I just love their enthusiasm. I love the way they think out of the box, love their drive, their passion. And, if this is really channeled in the right direction where you give them that confidence that, hey, you can be a problem solver and job creator for the country. Entrepreneurship is a very serious career option. And then you have a lot of role models. I keep mentioning Mukesh Bansal, Prashant Tandon, a lot of these other entrepreneurs who made it big without a pedigree and first generation entrepreneurs. Sky's the limit to what these children can achieve. Right. And when it comes to women, I often say that women sometimes limit themselves. So when opportunities are given, sometimes they're a bit skeptical about accepting the opportunity, or, they're always feeling guilty. Should I do this? Should I speak up? Should I ask for that raise? Should I ask for that deserved promotion? So I think the day women get rid of guilt and the day women start speaking up and stop limiting themselves, sky's the limit for them as well. So I think there's a very bright future for both sets of people.
Okay, and for you, how do you, anything that you do to kind of optimize your time? Do you, do you wake up early? Do you kind of have lots of coffee? Are you a fitness freak? Like, what do you do to kind of improve your own productivity?
One thing is I delegate a lot. So I'm very good about making a to-do list and then just handing it off to people. Like, you do this, you do this. That's an art too, Abha.
I know.
A lot of people who are perfectionists and then just want to do everything perfect. I'm like, you know what? Speed is more important than perfection. Yeah. Just go get this done. So I think I'm very good about my to-do list, and I'm very good about shamelessly asking for help and delegating a lot. And, lately I have been meditating because it's been stressful. So I took up meditation in the lockdown. It's really helped me because there was a bit of a restless energy in me, which I think at times made me unproductive. And if I'm going to take on a larger role and take on a much more complex business, there has to be a certain calm inside you. And you have, that's the only time you're able to reflect and listen to that inner voice. And it's been a beautiful journey. So I think that's helped. And of course, I love binge watching. So we were talking about Indian matchmaking and many such other shows that are completely mindless, senseless, and it's just all good fun. So I binge watch. I enjoy that as well.
It's good to know you can at least have some time for that, even as a busy leader. It's good to have a bit of balance. Oh, you got a lovely compliment coming in. She is so wonderful and insightful. I'm completely mesmerized. Rutvika, do you have a question? You can put your video on and ask if you like, if you have anything you'd like to ask Namita. And anyone else can also you could just send us a question
on the chat as well.
It's more, I think
just more comments.
Yeah, it's more comments. I think, yes, just ask the question, Rutvika. You can also unmute yourself and ask it if you like.
Hi, thanks. This is really so wonderful. I'm completely bowled over. So, Namita, this is Rutvika here. I'm a CA myself, and about 10 years back, I joined my father-in-law's company. We provide Swiss-made scientific HPTLC equipment in India. So, being a CA, I am by default handling the finances. But as you said, the itch to handle the P&L and drive the sales is always there. So how do I navigate this with my husband who looks after the sales and the technical side? Any pointers on that?
Yeah, I think, Rutvika, it's awesome meeting you because I feel our stories match quite a bit. When you become a chartered accountant, you get a label as a finance expert, and then you have to, you're right, it's very difficult to discard that label and make people look at you as something else. Because, people always think that people good at finance are only good at analysis paralysis and don't have that drama and that the skill that it takes to be a marketing person, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a very strong bias that I faced as well. What I would recommend you do is what I did with my father. It took me a long time. Like I said, it took me 4 years. But, being persistent and just saying that, you know what, don't give me everything. Just give me a small little bit, right? So, I'm just putting numbers out there. With 100 crore sales, just say, give me a tiny sub-segment or a product or a market to just work on as a pilot. And then work crazy hard to make that extremely successful with your innovative ideas, doing things differently. And then, people always want the company to grow. So if you can demonstrate that you can get them performance, you can get them numbers, you can get them success, you won't have to ask for more business. They'll give it to you, right? So I think initially start with convincing them to give you a teeny little bit, baby steps.
Yes.
The problem is we always like to think big, but very often when we're trying to crush biases, you need to think small, get a little bit, prove yourself, and then people without asking will give you more. So that's the only thing.
That is wonderful. Thank you. Evidence-based perspective.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much.
It's funny because when I was in the US and in my older company, I had a nickname. They used to call me Velvet Hammer. Because they're like, she just keeps hammering away.
Thank you so much.
You just have to be a velvet hammer. You just keep hammering away. You don't give up.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Priya has a question as well. Priya, would you like to, do you want to put your mic on, or should I ask it for you? She's asking about tips for work-life balance.
Wow. Number one is marry right. That's very...
This is true. Yes. Okay, I think we lost her.
Much time in your education, pay counselors so much money with school you're going to go to, a business school you're going to go to. Just invest the same amount of time in taking this up as a project and make sure you have a secure life partner. Because I think finding a life partner who's secure and will be the wind beneath your wings is extremely difficult. And that is something you really have to plan and try to have a checklist for. Because it's extremely important that your life partner supports you, because there's no way you can manage work and a family by yourself if you're an overachiever. Secondly, be shameless. I always say women are great at time management, but terrible at guilt management. Just be shameless and ask for help. I ask everybody for help. I tell my mom, I tell my mother-in-law, I tell my EA, I tell everybody, like, please help me with this, help me with this, help me with this. When you ask for help and are very candid and honest about it, you absolutely can manage your life a lot better. And then the third thing is, it's important to stay positive. So the whole half full theory of having a lot of gratitude and staying positive is important, so that even when you have your down moments and the balance is not there, because trust me, you'll have more moments when the balance is not there than when it is there, you're able to pick yourself up. And that has to come from within. No one else can do that for you.